Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This seems a fairly neat prediction of what Brexit would do to us all. What fresh hell is this? Nice to hear Jacob Rees-Mosley, I beg your pardon, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on the radio this morning, sticking up for German fascists. Happy days. Every time you think we've reached a pretty pass at which we could realistically describe we've reached rock bottom now, the only way is up, along come some of the usual suspects to dig us ever deeper into deceit and deception and division, and I'm afraid daftness. So I think this week, realistically, could see Theresa May insisting repeatedly that you can't keep voting until you get the result that you want, when describing the increasing calls for, especially given the... did you see what happened late on Friday after we'd said goodbye to each other? Vote Leave withdrew their appeal against the Electoral Commission's finding that they'd broken electoral law. The timing, eh? Just think about that. Michael Gove and Boris Johnson currently pretty close to leading the field on who would be the next leader of the Conservative Party, ergo quite realistically the next Prime Minister. The two co-chairmen of an organisation found to have breached electoral law in quite a spectacular way. And I'm fairly confident that no one will ask them about it, or at least if they do, it will be a cursory aside. Quite incredible, actually, when you reflect upon what we would have felt together 5 years ago about a major force in British politics, a force in British politics that could change the game for generations, having done so off the back of law-breaking. It would be unthinkable. And yet, if you need an illustration of just how dangerous this entrenched tribalism has become, this would surely be it. I honestly would not have given you the time of day 3 years ago if you'd said to me that Britain was going to be turned into a country of such chaotic, divided absurdity that a significant swathe of the population, and I'm afraid more pertinently my profession, a significant swathe of the population and my profession will not even raise an eyebrow at what happened late on Friday, when the people who had furiously denied any wrongdoing, insisted that they'd been stitched up by the Electoral Commission, enlisted the BBC to put forward a defence of their position before the prosecution and conviction had been properly reported. And then on March the 29th, the day that we were, of course, supposed to, quotes, leave, end quotes, they file away the news that they're not appealing against it at all. Now, it's very hard to look at the timing of that decision without concluding that they were planning on withdrawing their appeal all along. In other words, they acknowledged that their grounds for appeal were at best flimsy and at worst non-existent from the moment that that finding came in. Okay, they get a free pass on the BBC to defend themselves against, not allegations, of course, at that point, but findings. But March the 29th? It's almost as if they knew all along that they had very, very, very flimsy grounds to appeal, but that if Brexit had somehow been hauled over the line, which was, of course, the date that March the 29th represented, then they'd be able to put their hands up and cough to their guilt of the offences they have found to have committed. And there it is, really. You know, the point at which, yet again, we find ourselves looking in the rearview mirror and saying, how the hell did this happen? How have we ended up? And again, I appreciate that not everybody thinks this is the right way to approach things. A lot of you still harbour enormous bitterness and understandable ill will towards the members of your circle, your friends and your families that fell for a lot of this hogwash, and of course in many cases continue to do so. But genuinely, if you voted to leave the European Union because you felt that somehow your democratic freedoms had been compromised by membership, if you felt that somehow being subjected to supranational courts as a hearing of last resort somehow undermined your sense of being British, and if your sense of being British hinged upon that traditional epithet about fair play, and I don't think there's anything embarrassing or wrong about that. I think historically, and I know an awful lot of people again have a problem with this point of view, But I think we are a country that has revered and promoted fair play. I know my post-colonial history. I know that the empire in many ways did the opposite of those things on other shores. But I'm talking about the context of my own lifetime. The pride one takes in being British is built upon a perception that a Silvio Berlusconi or a Donald Trump could never happen here. We're too laid back, we're too British, we're too cool, we're too concerned with fairness and decency and stiff upper lips. But then in just 3 years, we've been turned into a country where in a campaign ostensibly dedicated to promoting British laws and democracy and transparency, can like a weasel in the night remove its appeal late on a Friday, secure in the knowledge that the people paid to keep the public informed of the most important issues facing the country will be largely quiet, because they're still all embedded in their own support for this ludicrous project. Of course, we can't properly report on the fact that Vote Leave, found guilty of electoral offences by the Electoral Commission, insisted shrilly that they'd done nothing wrong. Nothing to see here. Didn't Gisela Stewart, I may have got this wrong, so forgive me if I have, did she pop up on the telly this weekend claiming that they couldn't prove they were innocent because they destroyed all the evidence? It's a great message for you there, kids. Destroy all the evidence. And then you won't have to answer the accusations and the allegations.
But that hangover for some of the leadership candidates might be quite tricky. A story in The Observer this morning, Vote Leave, the campaign that led the referendum debate for us to get out of the European Union, which of course was led by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, have dropped their appeal against the finding that they broke electoral law by pushing the rules and spending in a way that you're not allowed to.
A lot more than they were allowed to. £675,000 more than they were allowed to. It's a big break.
It was a big break, and they were fined £400,000. And at the time, they said they would appeal it. They're very cross about how they believe the Electoral Commission operated. But Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, of course, were front and centre in that campaign. They've always denied they did anything wrong, or even necessarily if the political leaders knew anything about it. But I know later in the programme you've got Gisela Stewart, who was deeply involved in that campaign too.
And I just think this is quite interesting, because it was my colleague Carol Cadwallader who broke this a year ago with a whistleblower called Shamir Sani. And I interviewed them on Friday for a piece we're doing this week, and he has had a terrible year. As a result of that whistleblowing, he was outed as gay. His family didn't know about it. He lost his job. He's still struggling at the moment. And I think in many ways this vindicates the position that they took in the first place.
And he's sitting at home thinking, I was right all along.
He was right,
and now
yeah.
it's out there. And, yeah. OK, well, let's move on. Brexit demonstrations in Parliament Square this week, which we were talking about. Also this week, we saw Vote Leave dropping its appeal against the Electoral Commission's findings that it overspent during the referendum campaign. The former Labour MP Gisela Stewart was chair of Vote Leave and joins us from Birmingham. Gisela Stewart, first of all, you saw all the anger outside Parliament this week. Who do you blame for the fact that we are not outside the EU today?
I think once Parliament had put a difficult decision to the people and then promised to implement it, I think we have to blame Parliament. And the individuals, many of them are acting with absolute best of intentions, but collectively they have shown themselves incapable of delivering what they had promised to do. And I think that is the problem. And during the paper review, you had that sort of very interesting Burkean debate, are MPs delegates, or as Burke said, you elected me for your judgment. But even Burke subsequently was deselected by his constituencies. So I think in our representative democracy, when we have no effective government, which is what we've got at the moment, we resolve those problems by general elections. Constituencies can vote for their candidates, parties decide who their candidates are, and we get a new set of people coming into Parliament. And I simply cannot see any other way out of the current situation than a general election.
Now, Dominic Cummings, who you worked with very closely during this campaign, blames in particular Tory Brexiteers in the ERG. He called them this week the narcissistic, delusional subset of the ERG, useful idiots for Remain. Do you agree with him?
I find that we've reached a point where name-calling on either side really doesn't get us anywhere. And both sides are doing this, and I would just say to them, stop it. If you're a voter out there, or if you're running a business, you're trying to conduct your life, and you've watched 2.5 years of MPs being unwilling to make compromises, then I think you get pretty fed up. And we have seen that the last vote for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, even people like me who really did not, this was not the deal I really wanted at the end, but if I'd still been an MP, I would have said, look, this is as good as it's going to get. And they've got to make a decision. They're either going to start falling in behind her deal, manage getting their way out, or say, we want a different set of players.
Vote Leave broke the law, according to the Electoral Commission, in a serious way. This week, Vote Leave dropped its appeal against that decision. Why?
I think what it shows is that we have been outspent at every stage of this process, whether it was before the referendum started and the government spent 9.4 million on a leaflet. During the campaign, actually, if money was the question, collectively the Remain side spent more, and going to appeals costs money too.
Yes, but
what
sorry
it
to
also
interrupt
says,
you just for a
but
second.
Andrew, there's one other point. If people now who argue for a second referendum, if you had a campaign where we honestly always tried to be rule compliant. We had a compliance committee, and every other organisation across the board has been found wanting in some stage.
Well, with
the
respect,
legislation for a referendum.
You didn't try very hard because you overspent the tune of £675,000, a huge amount of money, which the Electoral Commission thought was a very, very serious electoral offence. You broke the law. It happened under your watch in this organisation. Will you apologise to people for that now?
It was in relation of one particular donation where the Electoral Commission interpreted the rules as that being acting in concert, which we had got legal advice which said it wasn't. So the key question is, Andrew, if anybody wants a second referendum, then the referendum legislation as it stands and the way the Electoral Commission and the Information Commission interprets them, that law needs rewriting. And that is something which we also have to face.
Nevertheless, the Electoral Commission is trusted by many people. At the time of their original judgment, Vote Leave said it was wholly inaccurate and contains false accusations that do not stand up to scrutiny. Do you stand by that statement?
I felt that our biggest problem in the end was that we destroyed all our data, and therefore some of the evidential basis which people were asking for. All I can tell you, Andrew, is that at every stage, in terms of the processes, we did our level best to be in compliance with the rules. If they were interpreted afterwards in a way which was different from the advice we got at that time, then so be it. So the regulators always have the final word.
You destroyed the data. The Electoral Commission were very upset that you did not cooperate more clearly with them at the time. Do you understand why many people in this country, on the other side of the argument, feel that this referendum in 2016 was corrupted and cannot be trusted because of the way Vote Leave behaved?
Well, the Electoral Commission never sought any evidence from the people from the Vote Leave campaign. But let me say something else. After 2.5 years...
They did.
Well, no, they didn't. We offered more evidence. But Andrew, if this was based, which is people are now saying, on a lie, that people didn't know what they were voting for, that they somehow were unaware of what this vote was, well, the opinions would have changed. Opinions have not changed. Opinions have hardened. And the one thing which we still haven't done is actually looking what Remain in the context of the rest of the European Union would mean.
I'm not asking about the lie or what people thought, but we both know that in elections and referendums, the amount of money spent really matters. That affects the number of adverts people see, things that come through their door, and therefore how they think and how they react. £675,000 is a huge amount of money to overspend, as it were, by accident. I ask you one more time, for all those people watching who are really upset by this, can you apologise to them for that either mistake or witting breaking of the law?
What I say is that at every stage we were rule compliant according to the legal advice we were given at that time. And if money was the question, Remain spent by far more money on the campaign than Leave did. The government spent more money on the campaign than we did. So do not say this was a question of money. This is why I say the rules should have been much clearer. We had a compliance committee. As our legal advice was always that was the right thing to do. If with hindsight the regulators found otherwise, the regulator has the last word.
All right, Gisela Stewart, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
That's what we've done to Britain. Turned it into a country where the winners are proven to have cheated, to have broken the law. to have ridden roughshod over what we would all have once considered to be the finest traditions of British democracy. And they do so with barely a peep from the people paid to keep you informed and up to date. I never know now, as of, about a couple of years ago, I never know what angle we're going to take at 10 o'clock at the top of the show on the days that we address Brexit. I didn't think we were going to go down this path, but it turns out that's what's been bubbling away within me most furiously over the course of the weekend. The fact that these people can somehow still bleat meaninglessly about the will of the people when we now know that the electoral offences committed during the Brexit referendum are not even going to be appealed by the organisation found guilty. The fine of £61,000 was, of course, imposed upon the group after the Electoral Commission concluded that it broke legal spending limits by donating hundreds of thousands of pounds to another Leave campaigner, a 22-year-old fashion student called Darren. Where'd you go next? £61,000 is chicken feed to these people, and we now know they've paid it. Friday afternoon, Electoral Commission said, "We found they broke electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Serious offences such as these undermine public confidence in our system." Just think about that. We found that Vote Leave broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. And you, if you're still down the rabbit hole, will now be shouting something about, oh, well, the other side were bad as well, or, oh, well, I don't care, the will of the people, just get on with it. That line right there, the Electoral Commission, these are the only institutions we have. You know, they're not perfect, but they're all we have. And they are unequivocal in their findings. Broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Now, two things occurred to me this morning. The first is, of course, if we could all forget how we voted in 2016, would we not all agree that we have to vote again after it's found that the winning side broke the law on a scale described by the Electoral Commission as breaking the rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event? Do you see what I mean about how deep the division has become? If we could use that thing that we talked about last week, someone even texted me the name of it, but I've forgotten, the thing that Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith use in Men in Black to wipe your memory, to wipe your memory bank so you don't remember the specific events of your encounters with the aliens and the Men in Black. If I could wipe your hand on heart, you know I'm right. If I could wipe your memory of how you voted and you just arrived here without one view either way, and I said, well, it turns out that one side broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Oh, and by the way, the two men that ran the organisation found to have broken the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. They're currently among the bookies' favourites to be the next Prime Minister. And they've never, ever, ever been held to account for this. Then we'd all at least agree that we should have the vote again, wouldn't we? Can I do that as a phone-in? Can you ring me as if you've had your memory wiped? Or, I mean, on what possible planet would you now be arguing that this isn't an appalling scar upon our democratic history? This campaign issued hollow slogans about sovereignty and control while knowingly undermining the rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Do you want to just have a crack at explaining to me how this has happened? How have we come to this? 0345 6060 973. And hand on heart, how could anybody who was on the, quote, winning side, end quote, I still don't know what you think you want. How could anybody be happy with this? I'm going to embarrass a friend of mine now. I'm hoping he's not listening. But I play FIFA on the PlayStation pretty much every week and have done for about the last 20 years with the same friend I've had since I was 16 years old. And he doesn't he doesn't feel his joy in victory is in any way diluted when he cheats. It's a strange personality mindset. He's one of the people I love most in the world. But when I've caught him cheating on a couple of occasions, because I didn't know that the new version had allowed you to change different settings, or that he'd been teaching himself little tricks without telling me what he was doing. If he wins by cheating, he still dances around the room just as joyously and just as joyfully as if he'd won fair and square. And I couldn't. It's just the way I'm made. It's nothing to do with education or influences or parenting or schools. If I beat you and I cheated, I'd probably cash the cheque, but I'd feel wrong inside. I'd feel a little bit soiled. I'd feel fraudulent. So, do you, as a Leave voter, now you know that they cheated, they broke the law, they rode roughshod over the rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Do you feel soiled? Because you should.
Well, look, we're going to move on because we're going to talk about Vote Leave, the official Leave campaign, which has dropped its appeal against a £61,000 fine for breaking electoral law over spending limits. We can talk to Emma Graham-Harrison, who is from The Guardian and The Observer. Emma, can you explain what Vote Leave were found to have done?
Hi, so Vote Leave broke electoral law, the Electoral Commission found. There's a series of infractions they found of the law, but at the heart of it is the fact that they went over spending limits by about £500,000, or nearly £500,000. And they did that through making what they described as a donation to another campaign group, but the Electoral Commission found that they actually coordinated the spending of this £675,000. They describe what happened as serious breaches of electoral law, and these are laws that were made by Parliament to ensure that our elections are fair and transparent. So I think, you know, what happened would be a matter of serious national concern at any time, really, that any vote had something like this happen in a campaign. But I think it's particularly a matter of concern when you have two men who are hoping to become our next Prime Minister, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, who had very senior positions in this campaign over the period when it was involved in breaking electoral law, and we haven't heard from them about this.
Right. Now, Vote Leave have decided to drop the appeal, as I said. What are you hearing about that, the reasons for it?
Well, I mean, it's obviously really for Vote Leave to say why they're dropping the appeal, not for me to speak on their behalf. In a statement, they said they dropped it for for financial reasons. As regards that, I would just say, you know, this is a group who've proved themselves extremely effective at fundraising in the past. So, you know, there is a question about why they wouldn't be continuing their fundraising if they considered the appeal essential to clear their name. And yesterday we did see one of the senior members of Vote Leave talking about that, and she didn't really address the issue of financial concerns. She sort of focused on other things.
Steve Baker, you were on the campaign committee of Vote Leave. Is it the right decision to drop the appeal?
It's really a matter for the Vote Leave directors. I'm not a director of Vote Leave.
But do you think it was right to drop the appeal?
Well, I think they possibly may have found they'd dropped it because it's too expensive to keep pursuing it. But these really are matters for the Vote Leave directors, and they're not questions that I can answer.
Fraser?
Well, the fine was, what, 60 grand? They say they've spent almost £1 million fighting this, so you can see how the economics don't stack up. And they were fined, I think, 40 grand for sending text messages without permission. They couldn't show they had permission, but that's because they deleted the database, just like the Electoral Commission had asked them to. So this whole thing is incredibly messy. And the bottom line for me is that the Leave side were vastly outspent by the Remain side, because they had the government as well as the Remain campaign, and still Leave won. I can see why that drives people mad.
But this is about breaking the law, isn't it? I mean, you may say it's not a level playing field in terms of who spent what, and they were outspent in your view. But in terms of the actual judgment, I mean, Steve Baker, at the time of the original judgment, Vote Leave said it was wholly inaccurate and suggested that the Electoral Commission was politically motivated. Do you share that view?
I am concerned about it because various senior figures have made statements which do indicate they have views on one side of the question. But I think this is a moment to be extremely serious about what is going on. As I've said earlier, I think democracy itself is on the table here. We have a large number of these institutions which regulate us one way or another, and it's absolutely essential that all of those institutions are politically neutral and scrupulously apply the law equally to all. Now, we're talking about Vote Leave today, but there have also been problems with other campaigns. And I think it's very important, if we're to have these institutions and have them operate credibly, they must be scrupulously neutral.
Jonathan, what is
Can I
your...
just jump in?
Yes.
No one else has been found guilty of serious breaches of electoral law. And I think sort of bringing this, talking about this in terms of who won the referendum or making it a question of what the result is a mistake in many ways, because what we're talking about here is serious breaches of the laws that are at the heart of our democracy, the laws that keep our elections fair and transparent. And regardless of whether or not it had an impact on the outcome, we should be asking ourselves as a country serious questions about how this happened and why people who were involved in it haven't really been called to account. OK, they've dropped the appeal. Neither Gove nor Johnson has spoken publicly about what happened. They've not tried to defend themselves, to explain it. Yesterday, Gisela Stewart was on the Marr show. She didn't apologise for what happened. And
Right.
to talk about the level of the fine, it seems, again, a very strange way to look at it. I mean, maybe the fine is too low,
Well,
but
Steve?
these are laws that protect the heart of our democracy.
Well, so we're all agreed that the law must be obeyed.
Right.
There's absolutely no question about that. The law must be obeyed.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Can I
Yes,
just,
you can.
Can I just ask? Just let me just ask just a quick question. Was Michael Gove Lord Chancellor at the time when he was breaching the law in this way?
I think that's a very risky thing for you to say.
I don't know. I don't know if he
Michael would
was.
have to answer that himself.
Well, it's only a question.
I'm only asking a question.
Well,
No, he
it's a very
wasn't.
carefully phrased
Wasn't.
question.
I'm sure he
Right.
Question, but I'm very clear that on the campaign committee, I had nothing to do whatever with the administration of money in Vote Leave.
But Steve, you did write this. But Steve, let me just read this because viewers may not know. But in early 2016,
Yeah.
you did send an email to parliamentary colleagues which said it is open to the Vote Leave family to create separate legal entities, each of which could spend £700,000. Vote Leave will be able to spend as much money as is necessary to win the referendum. Is that evidence that you and Vote Leave were looking at ways of exceeding spending limits any which way you could?
So the reason that I wrote that down and felt able to send it out in an email to over 100 Conservative MPs was because at the time I sent it, I believed it was lawful. Now, I am extremely angry with the person who badly advised me. They've never taken responsibility for poorly advising me to the point that I wrote that and have ended up sitting here today having to defend it. But I am absolutely clear that my conscience is free of any blemish on this issue. And I would also point out that in any event, that was written before the regulated period, and people can make mistakes.
Sure. So you admit it was a mistake. Who advised you, Steve,
I'm not
to
going
do
to.
that?
I think that he would be better placed to come forward himself.
Right, but the issue is also about coordination or joint working, as you know, Stephen. The Electoral Commission said that they'd found significant evidence of coordination with Leave, which was supposed to be the sort of youth arm of the whole campaign, Leave campaign. That's where the real breach came, isn't it?
Well, again, I can't answer for that. You'd have to ask the directors of Vote Leave. What I did during the campaign, and indeed before the campaign, was to coordinate Conservative MPs. It's a job I've done for a long time now. I think anybody who's ever tried to do it would understand that just to coordinate Conservative MPs is a job in itself, so it's not a question for me.
I mean, looking at the points raised by Emma about the leadership campaigns of people like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, is it fair to say that those campaigns could be tainted by what has happened and the fact that the appeal has been dropped?
Well, if I could just come in on a couple of the other issues that were raised there. First of all, I really do have every confidence in the impartiality of our regulatory agencies, whether you're talking about the Electoral Commission or the Information Commission. I would not question their integrity. I think the problem here is people playing fast and loose with the law, being caught out, and also spending an awful long time litigating and trying to force their position against the Electoral Commission, which I don't approve of. It's also interesting to note that this week should see UKIP finally comply with an Information Commissioner's Office request for data and information that they made last summer, which UKIP have spent a lot of money opposing. They've taken the ICO to tribunals twice, and they've finally been told, right, the end of the road is here. You've got to comply with the law.
What does it say about your colleagues, Boris Johnson and Michael Gove?
Well, I'd have to look into it a bit more, really. I don't want to condemn... I mean, basically, if I, for example, during the heat of an election campaign, candidates are not necessarily across the detail of expenditure. You might say they should be, but they've got agents, etc. And I don't want to condemn people without knowing whether they actually were implicit in the decision.
Do you think this will be? Do you think this will be an election issue if it becomes a leadership contest? That these are the sorts of things that will be discussed?
Frankly, I think it's even more fundamental than leadership elections. I think to speak in one breath about democracy and the next and threats to democracy, and the same breath to say it's OK to breach the law strikes me as a really odd way to go about politics.
No one's saying
and I
it's
have to
okay
say,
breach the law.
exactly the tone of politics is being conducted at the moment. You're going to have these extremes, and people are not going to talk about things sensibly. We're going to end up in a real mess, and that's where we have ended up.
No one is suggesting a breaches of the law are acceptable, least of all me.
So you condemn this breach of the law?
I condemn all breaches of the law.
You condemn this breach of the law?
I condemn this breach of the law and all well, that's a ridiculous way of putting it.
No, it's not, but it's not. It's not. The rule of law
if the law
is kind of what our constitution is based
Emily,
on.
I know.
I'm sorry.
It's all
but we've
over
got
my
two
website that I
people-
support the rule of
but
law.
we've got two people in senior positions in this campaign who now want to be leaders of the Conservative Party and want to be Prime Minister. If we don't abide by the rule of law, you cannot get out of it by saying, oh, well, we lost, but we would have won if we'd only had a few more... a little bit more money
Emily,
to appeal
I
it.
cannot let you get away with delivering this lecture and, by implication, smearing people. I am absolutely committed to parliamentary democracy and the rule of law. That is why I'm in politics. As I've already said, I'm enraged that I was badly advised. It is essential that we uphold the law. But, of course, the reason for upholding the law in this respect is to ensure the fairness of campaigns. And as Fraser's already pointed out...
All right.
The degree
law
to which...
is the law.
Hang on,
absolutely, the law is the law. But why is it that the law matters? It's in order to ensure justice.
I'm going to...
And the Remain campaign vastly outspent
Well, and we've
Leave.
said that they're different things because they didn't breach or they weren't found to have breached the law. Emma, a final word before we let you go.
I think it's important when you talk about details of expenditure. We're talking about £675,000 that was given to Believe, and nearly £500,000 over spending, the electoral spending cap. That spending cap was only £7 million. So we're not talking about, you know, expenses that somebody spent on, you know, their lunch or a taxi or something. These are huge amounts of money. And again, we're not talking here, I don't think, about who won the election or what the result is. This is about safeguarding elections. If people break the laws that protect our elections and protect our democracy, there need to be consequences, because otherwise you have to ask yourself what happens with the next election.
Emma Graham-Harrison, thank you very much. You. Steve Baker, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Hands up if you thought we would still be arguing about this now, after June of 2016. I know what you're thinking. When the Good Friday Agreement met the red lines, all of this became inevitable. But even I, despite having explaining that to you for, well, it feels like a gazillion times, even I thought that something will come up. You know, I've said to you before, the sense that, well, surely there are some grown-ups somewhere over the horizon who are going to come in here. But no, it just gets worse and worse and worse. The message being sent to the country, very glibly and I think dishonestly, is, well, you can't keep asking people to vote again until you get the result that you want. Nobody is saying, please let us vote again until we get the result that we want. The Remain campaign or the Revoke Article 50 campaign or the People's Vote campaign is simply saying, we voted without knowing what was going on, and we voted without knowing that one side was cheating, breaking the law on an epic scale. Factor in that 8 million quid that still hasn't been properly accounted for from the other Leave campaign, and you're left with huge questions hanging over the legitimacy of the result and the future of British democracy. All of us would once have lined up and united to say, this isn't right. I don't want to win if I don't win fair and square. The employment of the word British as an adjective that includes value judgments is dangerous in my view, because being British doesn't make you better than anybody else. Not per se, it's your behaviour that makes you better than somebody else. And a country, I don't know, can't really be construed as behaving. So how have we ended up? That's the question. How have we ended up as a country where we can find out that the biggest vote in our history was won by cheats, and we're not all up in arms? Because I genuinely believe if the England cricket team were found to have tampered with the ball, we would be too ashamed to keep the Ashes. I genuinely believe that. Maybe I'm horribly naive. It's my Enid Blyton upbringing coming to the fore. But you kind of think other countries, it might be the closest I ever come to mild racism, this, so get your notebooks out. You sort of think, well, other countries might do that, but we just wouldn't. We would never tamper with the ball. Well, Vote Leave tampered with the ball. Should they be allowed to keep the Ashes? 0345 6060973. Matt's in Southgate. I got there in the end, Matt. I think that's my first cricket analogy, but my goodness me, it's a zinger. Or possibly a googly. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I actually phoned in with a sports analogy initially, but yeah, I think they definitely should be rerunning the vote. I mean, I predict like an Olympic event. If you win...
I don't know what's happened to your phone line since you spoke to the producer, but I'm only picking up about one word in three. We'll try and sort that out momentarily. Toby is in Chelsea. Toby, if we won the Ashes and were found to have tampered with the ball, we'd give them back and play again, wouldn't we?
Listen, James, it's funny you should come straight into cricket, because my father was a Yorkshireman.
So was mine.
At 10 years old, I was at the crease. I'd taken a ball. My father was the umpire. Second ball, and I was convinced I was going to go in and make 50 even at that age. And it clipped the side of my bat, and I knew it. And it was beautifully caught. And these are 10-year-olds.
Yes.
So it was an amazing moment. And my father looked at me because I hadn't walked, and he said, "Toby, were you out?"
Oh.
And I said, "No, Daddy."
Oh, Toby.
Oh,
Toby, I appreciate this is possibly a slightly niche example of moral integrity and paternal intervention, but I feel every syllable of what you describe. I could almost have been there myself.
Oh, you could. And honestly, he then asked me again, and I said, "No, Daddy," because I didn't want to go. And you know what it's like in cricket. That's the end of it. You don't have another bat.
It was against Hawford Lodge for me a couple of years later, and the umpire was Mr. Walker. Oddly, and you'll indulge me for a moment, Toby, because I didn't clip it. I swear to this day I never clipped it. And I wasn't a very good batsman, and Hawford Lodge had this bowler who just did these enormous full tosses. And for the first time in my life, I was within a realistic chance of hitting a bunch of boundaries. I swung at about the second one, missed it completely. The wicketkeeper shouted, "How's that?" and Mr. Walker gave me out. And anyway, that's absolutely irrelevant to the conversation that we're having. But the point is pertinent.
Moments.
Yes,
they're moments of sport. And by the way, my father then raised his finger, and of course I walked.
Yes.
But later, he told me. He said, "One, the ball was brilliant. You didn't walk. The catch was brilliant. You didn't. This is what sport is about. It's all about playing within the rules. And if you win within the rules, fantastic." And by the way, I became a tennis player, not a bad tennis player, but then a very good tennis coach, and I've never cheated in anything since.
And I've said already, it's the closest I'll ever come to mild xenophobia or racism, and I don't think I am guilty of that offence. But the way I was raised, and like you, I presume we went through the sort of private school system where much is made of the playing fields of England and all that sort of thing.
I didn't.
Did you not?
I went to.
You've come out with a posher accent than me, Toby. So my parents should get a refund.
I was lucky. My mother worked for the BBC.
Oh, well, that
we called her the elocution unit.
Explains it all. But it is a British thing, this sense of fair play. Maybe it's what we've used to cover up some of our crimes around the world through history, but we are supposed to be better than everybody else. We're supposed to be more possessed of integrity, more concerned with fair play, more averse to cheating. I accept I'm possibly horribly naive, but I'd rather be like...
I don't think you're naive. It spoils everything.
Yes?
Cheating spoils everything. But our culture, whether it's in the corporation, and I work in a lot of these big corporations on culture change, or whether it's across the country and our politicians who are supposed to be setting examples. And as you often talk about in your show, politicians just stealing, a couple of quid for their pond or their duck or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I could spit at these people.
No, well, I could. Don't, whatever you do, because that would make us as bad as them. But they are currently spitting at any notion of transparent democracy. They're laughing at people who felt that it's not worth winning if you don't win fairly. And they are, I'm afraid, denigrating the example of English men and women through the ages who, like Toby's father, would never countenance cheating. Vote Leave cheated. Not only did they cheat, they denied that they had cheated up until the point at which they thought Brexit would have been hauled over the line. It may be a coincidence that they rolled over and put their hands up, to mix my metaphors, on March the 29th. It may not be a coincidence. Either way, they rolled over on the day they thought that their mission would be accomplished, a mission achieved by cheating. If we won the Ashes and were found to have tampered with the ball, I, as an Englishman, would want England to give back the urn. I'd want them to play the match again. And I'd want a promise from every player on my team that this time we will not cheat. Someone's telling me that we did something with boiled sweets at Trent Bridge in the 1970s or 80s, which highlights two things. Number one, my knowledge of cricket is not encyclopedic, and number two, possibly my perception of the Englishman at the crease is a little naive or idealistic, but heavens above. Look at the people on the other side of the argument and tell me who the faux patriots are, the pantomime toffs, the people who would ordinarily appeal to the example of English history, English tradition as a fine sort of paragon of virtue. That's the point, isn't it? I feel a bit stupid saying this to you, but I realise, looking at this landscape of deception and lies, I realise I did grow up thinking Britain was a paragon of virtue. Not in a way that meant the rest of the world would tug their forelock and bow down to give us trade deals they wouldn't give to any other country, punching at the same economic weight. But just because, well, that's what we're all taught, isn't it? What are we going to teach our children? Cheats do prosper. Oh, and always destroy the evidence. It's 10:30. And here's the line that would once have stopped the traffic and united us in our disapproval and disgust, but doesn't anymore because, yes, you guessed it, Brexit. We found that Vote Leave broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. Serious offences such as these undermine public confidence in our system, and it is vital, therefore, that they are properly investigated and sanctioned. We will never know whether it was the mother of all coincidences that Vote Leave folded on March the 29th, hung on, really, for as long as they could before concluding inexorably that we weren't going to leave on March the 29th. Imagine if we had, and then they withdrew their appeal. After the urn, and of course my cricket analogy is being picked apart by all comers. I know the urn stays at Lord's even if the Aussies win it, all right? I'm not completely stupid. I've been in the long room. But it spoils my analogy slightly. You have to have the image of giving them back. We'd give the Ashes back. We'd surrender them in shame at having discovered that we cheated. And of course the point is, and this is really crucial, right? Only takes one player to have cheated. You didn't cheat when you voted Leave. A lot of people say, how I know that they didn't influence my vote. They didn't do this, they didn't do that, nothing about Facebook. And I'm not going to argue with you, but don't ask me how it works. Ask the people that spent tens of thousands of pounds of money illegally how it works. Ask yourself why 8 million quid made its way into Leave EU coffers from sources that are still unclear. Don't ask me how it works, this spending of this money, this dark money on dark arts. Ask the people that spend it, because I'll tell you something for nothing. If it didn't work, they wouldn't spend it. So there we are. How have we become a country where cheats prosper and where the other 10 members of the team, to nudge this analogy to breaking point, the other 10 members, or not even that, you found out that the captain cheated. How do you feel as the wicket keeper? You found out the captain cheated. Vote Leave cheated. They managed cleverly. One thing that no one can accuse them of is not being clever at this kind of subterfuge and shenanigans. They very cleverly managed to nip this story in the bud when it first came out by insisting that it wasn't true and vowing to appeal. It was a little like Jonathan Aitken when he vowed to take on The Guardian in that infamous libel case. And then on March the 29th, they roll over. So if the captain cheated, would you still want your winner's medal? 0345 6060 973. Especially when you step out of the world of sport At least in sport, you can describe the prize. You still don't know what you think you won. You still can't describe this prize except in the most meaningless and nebulous of terms. But it turns out you only won after the captain cheated. I'm not even saying because the captain cheated. I think it's clear that because works in that sentence, but let's, for the benefit of all doubt, remove it. Let's not say that your team won because the captain cheated. Let's just say that your team won after the captain cheated. Would you still want your winner's medal? Or would you want to play again so that next time your victory would be pure? Ahmed is in Walthamstow. Ahmed, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Nice to take the call.
You're very welcome.
James, are we risking, as a society, more self-delusion?
Yeah.
By thinking that cheating doesn't happen? One main example comes to mind. There's a program on TV where they select somebody to go and work for an entrepreneur. And I can remember there was one instance where the guy undermined one of the competitors to get to be able to be the leader on the activity, and then subsequently won that competition. And the entrepreneur actually said, well, I like that. So, here we have...
I mean, there's undermining, and then there's breaking the law, mate. I mean, whether it's the laws of the game, and you can defy convention, you can swim against the tide, you can be a little bit fly, but here is a law written down, here is the body charged with enforcing that law, enforcing it, here is what they say about vote leave. They broke electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. I'm not fully au fait with the programme you described, but I'm pretty sure that the rules on The Apprentice are set out by Alan Sugar, not Parliament.
Well, that's right.
And if they broke the rules set out by Alan Sugar would come down on them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make...
Next example, please.
Okay, so up and down the cut, we're going to use cricket as a metaphor again.
Well, I just hit a six with your last ball, so do better this time.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind that. It's your six. Up and down the country, there are ECB qualified coaches that tell kids not to walk unless the umpire gives it. So, the idea that there are laws in place, yes, I completely get that. I completely agree with that. But I think as a society,
yeah, but again, mate, you forgive me, it should just be a 4 to the boundary, just on the leg side. But we have an umpire, so you can tell the batsman not to walk, and that you're encouraging him to be dishonourable. But if the umpire puts his finger up and the batsman stays at the crease playing and nobody objects, then your analogy with vote leave works.
Yeah, but nobody. Who's actually charged these people with electoral fraud? Nobody.
The Electoral Commission.
Finger up. No, but they haven't actually. What have they? They've fined them 60k, which is like punitive.
I think it's the biggest Electoral Commission fine, or certainly among the biggest Electoral Commission fines that's ever been issued. Just in a sentence, what's the point you're making? Everybody cheats. Just don't get your knickers in a twist, James.
The point I'm making, James, is that on primetime radio, we shouldn't delude ourselves that Britain is somehow more moral than everywhere else.
Well, this is a very rare moment where I can actually sort of come over all John Bull, and I can say, no, you're probably right, but it's not a delusion. We could fix this, and if we win by cheating, we feel soiled. I do as an individual. You perhaps don't. I don't know if that's what you're telling me.
I don't think that's fair. I don't either.
I didn't mean to get personal. How do you feel? So when I'm playing FIFA with my mate, and I've bust him for cheating, and he water off a duck's back, cool as a cucumber, doesn't and refuses, by the way, to review our record of results as well, which goes back over 20 years. If that was me, I'd feel utterly awful.
I would too, James. But I would too. But
why are you defending the cheats now then, live on national radio?
No, James. I do too. But the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes you can do something about it, and sometimes you just have to move on and get on with it.
That's an interesting point, and maybe I will, but not just yet. It's 10:41, 0345 6060973. Cheats never prosper, we teach our children, and today we learn that they do. Not only that, and it breaks my heart to say this, I'm afraid the cheats were facilitated hugely by the BBC's treatment of the original story when the Electoral Commission's findings were released. And of course that speaks to the much bigger picture of this weird delusion still gripping the nation. Very good profile of me in The Guardian today, if you want a quick explainer of how we ended up in the mess that we're in. And it does, I'm afraid, fall to journalism, much more than politics. And it continues to fall to journalism. It doesn't matter what side it is. Electoral Commission. That's all we've got. It's the only referee we've got. They've shown the vote leave a red card. But the crowd want them to play on. Neil's in Port Maddock. Beautiful part of the world. Really beautiful part of the world. What would you like to say, Neil?
Hi, James. You all right?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just thinking the fact that, you know, as a country, we're just so used to tribalism, aren't we?
Yes.
You know, you've got the football, you've got the cricket, it's just all tribalism.
Not in the rugby.
This has turned out to be.
You watch the rugby with a slightly more open heart, don't you? I mean...
not much of a sport fan, to be honest.
Are you not? Well,
I'm not, no.
Probably shouldn't have phoned in to use sport as the basis of your point then.
I guess, yeah. Makes sense. But I think, you know, with the whole Boris Johnson...
silly old sausage. Yes, go on.
I think it's down to the fact that if you've got enough money, it doesn't matter if you cheat, does it?
Well, I think it does matter. I
agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
What you mean is the more you've got, the easier it is to get away with.
Absolutely. And plus, you know, like you say about your mate and FIFA and stuff.
Yes.
That's, you know, it's just a game, isn't it, FIFA? That's all it is. It's just a game.
Here you go. Your mate isn't cheating, James. He learnt tricks that are in the game which makes him a better player than you. You sound like a sore loser, honestly. So there is, of course, that point of view as well. Maybe I need a better analogy. This is cheating. This is breaking the rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy. And do you know what we haven't even done yet?
Go on.
The Downing Street angle.
Mm-hmm.
But Downing Street knew, because somebody very senior in the Vote Leave campaign is on the inner circle of Theresa May's staff. He's the fella that outed Shamir Sani.
When you look back to the go-home bans, it's not much of a surprise, is it?
Well, it still surprises me. I'm beginning to think I'm the least cynical person in the country, Neil. I used to think I was the most cynical. I genuinely do trust in institutions. I genuinely do think that politicians like Nadine Dorries denigrate our democratic history. We shouldn't have people in Parliament who aren't bright enough to look after their constituents. And we shouldn't have people in Parliament who've cheated. On the biggest, it's not the biggest actually, the 1992 election had a bigger turnout, but the idea that Gove and Johnson led the cheats and now lead the bookies on who could be next Prime Minister. Explain that to me, Neil.
Again, it's down to them just thinking, because they've got nothing to lose, have they, James? I mean, if we crash out, oh well, for them I mean now, for the rest of us, oh dear Lord, you know, but for them, it's just a game, isn't it? Like,
are the rules for the little people, Neil, like taxes?
Say it again, sorry?
Do you think rules like taxes are for the little people?
Of course they are.
Well, then I'm proud to be a little
You're
person.
You're not going to find a way out of your pay as you earn, are you? You know, you pay whatever.
Yeah.
It's you know, you can't just decide suddenly, oh, I think I'll invest in some tax avoidance.
Well, you can, no, if you haven't got gazillions of pounds in the bank, you can't. I don't know, am I sounding horribly naive today? Am I the least cynical person in the country? This idea that it really should be a big deal? We need to pin down precisely what that Downing Street connection is as well. The former chair of Vote Leave, Gisela Stewart, the three chairs, if memory serves, her, Gove and Johnson, has sidestepped calls to apologise for the campaign-breaking electoral law. She told Andrew Marr yesterday that the Brexit campaign's legal advice ruled their activities compliant, but regulators found otherwise at a later date. She added that Vote Leave had been outspent by Remain and that it had, and I quote, destroyed some of the evidential basis people are asking for. So there's Gisela Stewart saying, but our people said we weren't breaking the law. That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it, if you turned up in court, you were being prosecuted for theft, and you said, no, but my mum said it wasn't theft. Or even if you said, I brought my own quasi-police officer, I've brought my own law compliance officer with me, and they insist it wasn't theft. I didn't punch him, Your Honour, he ran into my fist. Unfortunately, we've destroyed all the evidence that would support our position. That's Vote Leave. How can you not feel soiled if your captain cheated? Even if you are the most upright, decent player in the history of the game, your captain's cheated. Give the cup back, play the game again. What would you call somebody who claims that his Christianity compels him to object to women who've been raped being offered abortions, and yet who tweets supportively a far-right German politician whose own churches in Germany have essentially argued that their politics is incompatible with Christianity. Let me run that by you once again. A variety of Christian leaders in Germany, from both sides, the Protestant and the Catholic, have explained how they consider membership of the so-called AfD as being incompatible with Christianity. The AfD get tweeted approvingly by an increasingly far-right British politician who simultaneously claims that his, quotes, Christianity, end quotes, compels him to believe that victims of rape should not be allowed abortions. I'll tell you what you call him. Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's 10:52. Back to this question of cheating. Vote Leave cheated on I think on an unprecedented scale, although I'm not a scholar of Electoral Commission fines. And the simple question is, when did we become a country where cheats prosper and where everything got so entrenched and enmeshed in division and deceit and delusion that even if you ended up on the winning side and then found out that your leaders cheated, you're still cheering? Jonathan is in Harrogate. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Good to speak to you again.
Likewise.
I think it's a sort of insidious and incessant drip of getting away with things that's taken this country down the plug hole, quite frankly.
Do you know, I think you're right. I almost wish that there was more of a shared responsibility. I wish it wasn't all now being viewed through the lens of Brexit. I wish we could point at... Do you see what I mean? Otherwise, it just looks like, well, you know, I'm a Remainer, therefore I'm furious about this cheating, but if it was the other way around, I'd be supremely relaxed about it. It's the double standards that are breaking everything and the absence of moral consistency.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you and I both went to rugby playing school, so I think we're a higher plane of morality.
Let's not get carried away, Jonathan, but I take your point.
Going back to your football analogy and your cricket, I'll go for a football analogy rather than a cricket one. And, you know, everyone remembers Maradona's hand of God and all that sort of stuff, and the Thierry Henry incident, all that. And we as English supporters or whatever we are, think we're beyond that. But just go to a normal Premier League or a championship game at a weekend and look at diving in the box and how many players are doing that these days to try and get the penalty, because it's the end result that is the thing that causes people to do the necessary evil as they see it.
Do you know, I talk a lot about, I think I may even have invented the word footballification, but I could be wrong about that. It certainly works, doesn't it? But even when I was coining the phrase, I didn't really think it was reaching so deeply into the national psyche, but it is now. Brexit in particular, not party politics, oddly, because they're even more divided than the country now, the individual parties, but Brexit in particular. And I for me, the Leave side are almost the exclusive recipients of this criticism. It doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what the moral landscape looks like. Our side can do whatever the hell they want and we will cheer them to the rafters while booing the other side, even if they play by the rules and we don't. And that, again, I'm uncomfortable with this, but I'm speaking from the heart. That's un-British.
Yeah, but I think it comes to... I think that's right. There was always a right or a wrong, but I think these days there's too much blurred edges.
Do you remember the Aussie bursting into tears? The Aussie captain or vice-captain bursting into tears a couple of summers ago? Who was it? Steve Smith, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That is how Vote Leave should look today. That's how Boris Johnson and Michael Gove should look today. And unless they want to claim that somehow the three people in charge of the campaign had nothing to do with or no knowledge of the cheating, in which case you'd be looking for some sort of corporate governance finding. It'd be like Alan Sugar claiming he's got nothing to do with what goes on at Amstrad, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's you know, going back to football again. You know, if you get tapped on the foot in the penalty area, you know, the pundits say, well, he got tapped on the foot, so he goes down to get the penalty. Well, in my day, you know, I'm talking, I'm slightly older than you, and it is. I think even then, back in my day at school, when we played rugby, we played it to a higher level of integrity.
Well, I tell you what, though, Jonathan, I wonder if we're now guilty of what we normally criticise the other side for. We're now indulging in a sort of exceptionalism, aren't we? I imagine if you were listening to this in Ireland at the moment, the idea that I, with a name like O'Brien, am upholding England or Britain as a fine paragon of historical international virtue.
I'm taking it out of the national context. I just think there's a right or a wrong, and that's an individual thing.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop saying British fair play, a British sense of fair play, because in a way that's a weapon that's been wielded by the crooks and the criminals rather than by the actual upholders and advocates of fair play, which, once again, reminds us exactly what Dr. Johnson meant when he described patriotism as the last refuge of a scoundrel. There is no such thing as a British sense of fair play. Please ignore all of my appeals to it prior to this point. There is fair play and there is unfair play. And wherever you were born or grew up or were educated should not be the determining factor. That's about your conscience. That's about morality. And vote, leave, cheated. If you're cool with that, your conscience is malfunctioning. 0345 6060 if you think you can construct a defence of your cheating leaders. Simon's in Grimsby. Simon, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I honestly think that the amount of scandals that have happened in the previous years, with the expenses scandal and the sex paedophile ring and everything else that has gone on in the years past, I think people are that used to hearing about it now. They're not shocked anymore. So hearing about this isn't really a big deal to many people anymore, do you know? Because
well,
there's been
I'm
that many
shocked.
different lies.
I think you're right. But I'm still shocked. The day we stop being shocked, the day we all stop being shocked, is the day evil triumphs, isn't it? It's the day. It's the day morality sets sail.
Though people complain about it, but nothing ever gets past that. You know.
It's hard to think. I mean, a couple of people ended up in prison after the so-called expenses scandal. But, you know, Michael Gove's wife was tweeting something the other day about, I can't remember whether it was all the Remain voters were supposed to have gone to Waitrose or something like that. And someone pointed out the long list of things that they claimed for on expenses, from a homeware shop, from a home furnishing shop owned by David Cameron's mother-in-law, I think, or something ridiculous like that. And you sort of think, well, yeah, you get busted for that, for the flipping of the houses, for all of the appalling abuses rather than offences that went on under that, and all of those people walked away scot-free. Why on earth would they approach the referendum thinking, oh, we better play by the rules this time?
Well, I mean, if you've got politicians looking at you and lying to your face,
yeah,
I don't know how you can call that any part of democracy. I just don't get how you can call it.
No, nor do I. But then, what is the? I mean, is it football? Because I know what it's like to support a football team. I've always been cursed with supporting largely unsuccessful teams since the 1980s when Nottingham Forest were in their pomp. But I can't quite imagine that level of blind partisanship that you'd need to look at politics and think, as long as my fella wins, I don't care if he cheats. I can't quite get there, Simon.
Very weird, to be honest with you. I really do. I think they've just got used to being able to use all the words that they can, and they never answer a proper question. You know, I think they've got that used to getting away with so much.
And they just kind of carry on, and then you push and push and push. And what Steve Bannon, of course, advises these people to do, presumably, is to ignore the boundaries altogether. There are no boundaries. Look at Donald Trump. We'll talk about this for a little longer, partly because nobody else will. And I've said this to you a few times. The media's corruption is accidental, largely. There isn't some secret cabal of string-pulling plutocrats trying to necessarily influence the future of the country to the detriment of the population, but to the benefit of string-pulling plutocrats. A lot of it happens by accident. You know, as I said to you last week, if Boris Johnson had arrived in Brussels as the Daily Telegraph's correspondent shortly after being dismissed from the Times for making up a quote from his own godfather, that's the point the last caller made, isn't it? We've just got so used to it now. This moral dereliction that is so commonplace in public life. And the way they castigated Gordon Brown, who was, I would say, decent to the point of dullness, Gordon Brown. They castigated him, pulled him to pieces, hauled him over the coals. Boris Johnson's second job in journalism came as a result of having been fired from his first one for making a quote up from his own godfather. And he's been doing it ever since, to his wives, to his employers, to his readers, to his voters. Lie after lie after lie after lie. Where is he now? A hot favourite to be the next leader of the Tory party. Pip, pip. But he was chairman of this campaign that's been found to have cheated. Yeah, well, suck it up. So where is fair play in the context of Brexit? Where is probity, integrity, morality, honesty, truth? Neither side has a monopoly on it. What we missed was a referee, isn't it? It's all very well talking about the footballification of everything. We don't just need a referee, we need VAR. If we had a referee and VAR, they'd call the whole thing off, make us play again. Or they might even have forfeited the result, actually, by cheating. But we don't. We've got a Prime Minister inhabiting a Downing Street where some of the people integral to the Vote Leave campaign are now working. So the Prime Minister has people associated with cheating and the breaching of electoral law on the actual payroll. It's possible I'm going bonkers as I survey this carnage, this political chaos, and think it's quite clear to see the most abject demonstrations of political and moral corruption. We'll be joined, hopefully, by Shamir Sani before the end of the programme because he has been completely vindicated. How many calls did he get from the BBC yesterday to appear on their flagship political programmes? 0. How many calls did Gisela Stewart get? A chair of an organisation found to have breached electoral law? Well, at least 1, because she was on the telly. Didn't quite work, did it, that? I needed to say 47! It's incredible. And you'll remember Shamir was outed against his will to the endangering of himself and some of his family members by his former partner, his former boyfriend, who is still on the payroll at Downing Street. And it was all done to discredit and undermine the allegations that on Friday, Vote Leave stopped fighting. This is just huge. If I've done anything over the last few years, I've discovered this really mysterious ability to trust my instincts rather than doing what I've done throughout my career, which is to follow. I'm not suggesting I lead. I don't think there's anyone behind me. But it's incredibly liberating, you know, like the little boy in the crowd with the naked emperor parading past while all the grown-ups insist that he's wearing beautiful robes. You trust your instincts. It's why you end up with no or very few political heroes. You end up politically homeless. You vote for the least bad of a bad lot, I guess, ultimately. Or you vote despite the leader of the party for your constituency MP. But on this one, I know that this is huge, and I know that you would agree with me at almost any other point in British history. On an electoral exercise of this scale, however you voted, if it turned out that the winners cheated, you'd want to do it again. But Brexit's broken something that I made the mistake in the last hour of describing in a sense that made it fundamentally British. I completely withdraw that. Honesty, integrity, decency, fair play, these are human attributes that only some humans have. And the humans who don't have any, humans who do not care about anything except short-term success, short-term approval, regardless of truth, the politicians who know that such is their toxic brand of populist, deceitful rhetoric, that they could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue without losing a single vote. The people who understand that are in the ascendancy. And Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson are both reported to have broken bread with the mastermind of Donald Trump's election campaign in recent months. Make of that what you will. Today you have Jacob Rees-Mogg on Twitter approving of the leader of the AfD, an organisation so fundamentally at odds with basic human decency that both Catholic and Protestant leaders in Germany have said it's impossible to support that party's policies while considering yourself a Christian. Won't give Jacob any sleepless nights, I don't imagine. And if it does, of course, Nanny will be at hand with an Ovaltine. Chris is in Lancaster. Chris, what would you like to say?
Yeah. Hi. I absolutely agree with you. I've never actually listened to your programme before because we're up in the north and you're not in the north.
It's a national radio
but I
station.
absolutely agree with what you're saying. I'm a bit like the emperor in the crowd, and I've been shouting they've got no clothes on for quite a while, to be honest.
But we didn't know they cheated on this scale, did we?
Oh, yeah. No, they cheated from the beginning. I mean, I told you, Guy, that I was on the phone. I said, I said, I voted in because I didn't know what I was voting out for.
Yes.
I had no idea. It was like, vote in. And when, unless you're into politics, I didn't really know what was in, to be honest. But I just knew how I lived was okay. And, it's better than a lot of places in the world. And then The next thing was, there's a table here with a tablecloth on. Would you like to vote for this? Well, no, because I don't know what it is. And I've worked for the NHS for 36 years. And, you know, a banner on a bus I've seen 1,000 times saying the NHS is going to get this. The NHS. So we just laughed out loud.
No one believed that bus. Chris,
No,
you must keep up. The man who ran the campaign thinks it was by far the most important element of the entire campaign, but nobody who voted Leave did so because they believed the bus. They all knew it wasn't true.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, then they skulked off in the wood and never to be seen again, are they? But
well, I wish you were right. They are being seen again. Michael Gove and Boris Johnson. You just heard Michael Gove in our own bulletin, buttonholed outside his house and not even asked about it. I mean, what's the equivalent? This would be like the chairman of a listed company not being asked about the fact that their balance sheet has turned out to be utterly inflated, utterly misrepresented. They've gone to shareholders and said, well, we made X billion pounds last year, and it turns out they didn't. And no one would be questioning the chief executive. It's quite incredible, actually.
Yeah, I quite agree. But you skulked up in the wood and then came out, what I was going to say, come out the other side and was given great jobs, you know. And I'm thinking, how can that be? Because, you know, if I did something wrong in the NHS, that would be the end of it, you know. There'd be an investigation, that would be it. But he can go out through the woods, hide for a bit, come out the other side and give him jobs, you know.
You could stand up at work today and say, do you know, until I became a nurse, I had no idea, or I had no idea how important medicine was for treating patients, and they'd pat you on the back and give you the Dominic Raab Award for Employee of the Month.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, you know, and you know, it's just like it's been, and I don't think you bar me at all, because I think people are just greedy, there is no morals, there's no truth, and from the very beginning, we've just been duped. I mean, as I say, I voted in because I didn't know what out was. I hadn't a clue. But I've no problem with anybody who voted out because they may be more informed than me. You know, they may have had more information. Having voted for out, you know, I'm going along with it. But quite honestly...
Well, I thought by now we all would be, and yet it just keeps queuing up, and now this utter nonsense about what WTO terms. The only thing that allows the people who've been wrong about everything to pretend that they haven't been wrong about everything is by backing the thing that is the hardest to specify. The only thing left on the table that doesn't actually need to be described is crashing out with no deal. So up they line, up they queue to support the idea of crashing out with no deal, because it's the only thing that allows them not to answer the questions that they should be answering. It's incredible.
They're given a little bit of power now. They've got each group's got a little bit of power, and it's gone to the head. And I want my...
I mean, it's even more bleak than you're describing it. I think that there's the people who've had all the power all along, and then arguably during the post-war period, they've seen some of that power eroded. They hate the welfare state, they hate the NHS because it means that decent, ordinary people have got access to healthcare and education and support when times are hard. We don't have to doff our cap and tug our forelock to the Lord of the Manor because if we haven't got a job with him, we'll starve. They hate it. They hate it all.
Oh, yeah, well, I won't be docking my hat.
No.
And, you know, we don't wear clogs up here and have whippets, and this is what they're saying.
Talk to me. My mum's from Sheffield and my dad's from Leeds. I appreciate in the context of the roses, this isn't going to endear me to you, but in the context of the North-South divide, please don't chalk me up as a member of the dislocated. Although, I need to remind you, Chris, this is a national radio station. So spread the word, please, in Lancaster.
But we don't get... we don't get the information. We just don't get it. You know, it's like we're not...
You rely on the BBC, and the BBC
exactly.
yesterday had the chair of Vote Leave, one of the chair of Vote Leave on there, and essentially just sort of eased her passage towards simultaneously saying, oh, well, of course, we've destroyed all the evidence, and, well, we didn't do anything wrong. Imagine that. Chris, thank you. I look forward to your next call. Hilary is in St Albans. Hilary, what the flip is going on?
I have absolutely no idea, but I'm so pleased that you're airing this issue because it's something that has completely flummoxed me. I don't understand why, when they've been shown to be guilty, all sorts of issues around the way the election was run, and I'm told that they can't rerun it, they can't cancel the result and rerun it because it wasn't binding, and yet all the time we hear politicians saying politically we have to.
That's not as what's that word? Reconcile. It's not as irreconcilable as you think. The point was that David Cameron insisted politically that they would enact the result, whatever it was. And then legally, or technically, it is not binding, which means when you go to court and say this is a breach of the law, therefore you should call it off. The court can respond by saying, well, yes, it is a breach of the law, but you can't call off something that isn't binding. And it's binding because David Cameron says it was, but David Cameron's statements are not a legally binding contribution to the public discourse. So I understand your confusion and your unhappiness, but to be really pedantic about it, it's logical what's happened.
Well, I get that.
I know you do. I didn't mean to patronise you.
Sorry, but what the politicians are saying to us is, you know, as if it was a level playing field when it wasn't. So I can't understand why there isn't more people in Parliament saying, but the vote was got at by cheating.
I know.
And I have relatives who've never been involved in politics at all. I mean, literally, as bored to tears as anything, when anything to do. They voted because they always felt they should vote, but always along specific lines of, you know, this is how we've always voted and we're not really interested in what else is going on. They're up in arms. They actually came to the march last week. People who've never marched before in their lives, from Dorset and Somerset, for goodness sake, going... Yes. We want another vote because it wasn't done fairly. You know, we believe strongly in right and wrong. So you talking about it and actually airing it is really good.
Well, it's oddly, even very, very short of dissenting voices today on the switchboards and on the texts and the emails, because I think however embedded you are in the belief that the European Union is somehow an enemy of our interests, a position I furiously dispute and disagree with, but however embedded you are in that idea, you're probably not going to ring up a radio station and say, I'm cool with cheats. I'm glad that my leaders cheated. Because somewhere deep inside, everybody has apart from actual sociopaths, everybody has a conscience, don't they? Deep inside. They know they don't want to be winning through cheating. It's not worth winning at all if you can only win through cheating. Or am I sounding very naive again?
I don't know, because one of the things that is really disturbing me about this is it feels like we've lifted a lid where people whose voices would normally only be heard in quiet places feel able to say very loudly incredibly racist things. We've had increased attacks on people from different cultures. We've had all sorts of things coming out of the ground that I never thought, I mean, I'm 62, I never thought I would see in this country. And I have friends from European countries going, we don't understand what's going on. We've always looked to the UK and to British people as people who have got lots of understanding, lots of focus, lots of respect. We don't understand what you're doing, and you've lost your credibility.
Well, it's
hugely.
One of those pub quiz nuggets, actually, that comes in useful quite often. When we talk of the mother of all parliaments, it doesn't actually describe the building in Westminster. It describes this country. This country is known. I mean, of course, now someone's going to ring me and say, yeah, it is known as the mother of all parliaments, James, but only by you lot. None of us call it that. Actually, historically, you're wrong. This is the mother of all parliaments. Great Britain is the mother of all parliaments because it upholds the values and the rules and the ideas that Vote Leave have, I'm afraid, urinated all over. And the two men at the head of that organisation are now vying for Downing Street. And my profession, just waving them by. The sort of things I'm getting by way of explanations for how you can be comfortable profiting from corruption, or why you're cool with the idea that cheats do prosper. The Remain campaign spent more than the Leave campaign. It's not strictly true. The government spent money on remaining, on encouraging people to vote to remain, but that's what you elect governments to do, to spend money in what they consider to be the best interest of the population. In many ways, it's the fundamental definition of democracy. You elect politicians to spend public money raised by taxation on what they consider to be in the national interest. There's a very strong case to be made for saying that spending money on a referendum, such a boneheaded binary referendum, was a dereliction of David Cameron's democratic duty. But there are very few things behind which the country is united at the moment. I think the utter uselessness of David Cameron is pretty close to being one of the few things on which we can all agree. But once he had called that ludicrous referendum, it's not his fault, by the way, that one side cheated, but once he'd called it, It was his democratic duty to spend public money raised through taxation on what he, as the elected Prime Minister or the leader of an elected government, believed to be the best interest of the country. So you have to park that, I'm afraid, even though it has a patina of logic to it. And also, if I spent more money on you than you on something that we were both seeking to achieve, it doesn't in any way excuse you if your money was stolen. Do you see what I mean? If you cheated, you're a cheat. It doesn't matter whether you come first, second or third, you're a cheat. When did we become a country that promotes cheats? And a lot of you are telling me we always have been, which I'm sort of lacking the psychic energy to argue with today. I want to squeeze in a couple of more calls before 11:30, and then we'll move on. 0345 60973. There's a slight flavour of consensus hanging over this issue. It may be because for once we are all agreed. Leavers, Remainers, somewhere in between us. The cheats should not prosper. But they have. And I want to know why, against that backdrop, it's acceptable for the Prime Minister to contemplate putting a vote to Parliament for the 4th time, but not acceptable for the same Prime Minister to contemplate putting a vote to the people for the 2nd time. In this case, the first time without cheating and with the necessary information and without an awful lot of lies and hot air that propelled Leave over the line in June of 2016. That's the bit I just don't get. As I said, sorry to bang on about it, but my book asks at the beginning and the end of a Brexit chapter that I'm supposed to be updating but can't because the blinking target keeps moving every time I get my bow and arrow out. I still don't know what they think they won. First line and last line, I think. It was in the original anyway. I might have changed it in the second draft. What did you win? Sovereignty. Control. Well, we know that's not true. And now it turns out that you actually won by cheating. How can that be satisfactory to somebody possessed of a moral compass? Mark's in Loughborough. Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me on. I'm of the view that a lot of people on the other side think as regards the overspending, that the end justifies the means. And I'm interested to hear you say that quote the bit about the government having spent money on, this famous leaflet. And I think a lot of people on the Leave side do think, well, they had all the resources and therefore it doesn't really matter if we sort of bent the rules a bit.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And spent a bit more. I mean, it's, also I think that a lot of people on the Leave side and now Remain side, I think there was a lot more passion on the Leave side during the campaign. Remain was very, and a lot of people, I think, voted Remain at that point for a kind of, I was passionate about it, but not as passionate as I am now.
No, same here, mate. So I wasn't even remotely passionate about it in the run-up, actually. I mean, how do you get passionate about this? You get passionate about the status quo. It's very hard to do. Get passionate about promises. I'm promising you unicorns. I'm promising you wealth. I'm promising you 350 million quid for the NHS. I'm promising you control. I'm not aware that it had been taken away, but if you tell me it's been taken away, now you're promising to get it back. You're my man.
Well, I think also that if you start bandying about words that have actually they're quite nebulous, but have quite different meanings to different people, stuff like freedom and independence, for instance. Once you start injecting those into the debate, then the whole game changes and it stops. Rationality goes straight out of the window, and they start arguing about freedom. Oh, what you want is independence.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Independence Day. It's like, well. Coming back on that was like, we're already independent. It's such a kind of weak comeback.
We're going to be able to make our own rules and do our own trading agreements, say people who now hold banners saying WTO now without having the first idea what that means. We can't laugh, though. I don't know. Maybe you have to laugh. The alternative is too bleak. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's a wry laugh. Mark, a wry chuckle, and there it is. I mean, and on it goes, ever inflated, and now WTO or crashing out with no deal offers them yet another opportunity to camouflage the fact that they don't know what they're talking about, and everything they said would happen hasn't happened. Culminating in, for me, the crucible of this whole con, which is the fact that they actually cheated. What is the point of rules, laws, no less, set by Parliament, if you can win a nation-changing vote, having broken them, and walk away with a slap on the wrist. A £61,000 fine. And you know what happened when the Electoral Commission said that they wanted more robust powers to police these things? Senior Conservatives queued up to say that would be ridiculous. You'd have to ask them why. Mark, thank you. Loughborough to Sevenoaks. Dan's there. Dan, what's going on?
Hello, James. It's great to speak to you.
Thanks, Dan.
Especially in the context, I've just read your book, and imagine if the BBC was littered with journalists of your calibre, what a different situation we'd be in now. But
You're
well
very
done,
kind.
sir.
I'm not sure that's true, but I'll take it to the bank in the current circumstances.
I'm very confident.
Have you really just finished it?
I've only... It's taken me a few days to read it.
Putting them on the spot now. Good. Can I ask you a question, as if no one else is listening?
Yes, okay.
Does it still work? Because the paperback's out in June, and I can't think of... This is going to sound incredibly arrogant. It's not as arrogant as it sounds. When I say I can't think of anything I can improve, I don't mean that it's perfect. I mean, I think it still stands up to the current landscape.
It does. I read it on Kindle.
Yes.
And the only thing you could do, I suppose, is bring out a new edition that brings on some of the conversations that you've had since you first published it.
Yeah, that's for a sequel. That's not for an update.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Dan, I value your advice on that one. Where were we? What did you ring in for?
Okay, so I called in because I want to let you know that I work for a company that takes me all around Europe.
Yes.
I can't say who it is because I'd probably get the sack for expressing a political opinion, but I regularly find myself in meeting rooms with people from Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Czech Republic, etc. And apart from the fact that they're all becoming semi-obsessed with Brexit in a kind of soap opera kind of way and find it very, very funny, especially after last week when I was in a meeting when the House of Commons voted absolutely everything as a no. They found that absolutely hilarious. Apart from that, in the context of what you've been talking about today, fair play and the Britishness of it, what they all unanimously can't believe in those countries, and they're people that have been born and bred in those distant countries, is the fact that we, the British citizens, have allowed ourselves to be lied to so incredibly and not doing anything about it. So in that context of what you're saying earlier on about fair play, they are absolutely gobsmacked. But hang on a minute, how have you tolerated this? More importantly, why aren't those people in prison or something? Why has there not been some significant consequences about the fact that you've been lied to so dramatically?
And do you have an answer for them? Because at the moment, I don't.
No, I don't have an answer for them. And after we've had the usual jokes at the start of a meeting about, oh, Dan, how's it going with Brexit, laugh, 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 that's the kind of thing that they're absolutely amazed about. And I said, to be honest with you, I think it's just, we've accepted it culturally now.
But I haven't, you haven't, none of the callers today have, my inbox hasn't, I mean, millions of us haven't. The problem is the journalism. The journalism reflects a country that doesn't care about this, whereas actually the country does care. And do you know what? In the spirit of building bridges and contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned, every Leave voter I know cares about this sort of thing. They might not yet be ready to call for a second referendum, but they care about corruption and electoral law being broken.
Yeah, absolutely. But I've got a very good friend who gets his news from the Mail online.
Oh,
now,
Lord.
At the end of the day, if that is your source of what is going on in the world, of what is occurring in your country, in your community, in your society, if that is your source every single day of your life, then guess what? It's no surprise that you're going to come out with absolute rubbish about bendy bananas and £350 million to the EU every week. That is your source. That is how you find out about what goes on in the world.
So odd, isn't it? No one saw this coming. I'm late for the news, Dan. Thank you for the kind words. I gave you a 2-minute extension, seeing as I prevailed upon your publishing advice. And after that, delighted to be joined by Shamir Sani, the whistleblower with regards to Vote Leave's breaking of electoral law, who was told variously that his whistle was broken, that his whistle was invisible, that his whistle was worthless. And, of course, late on Friday, his whistle turned out to have been bang on the money all along. We'll find out how he's feeling. One of the few corners of the British media where we will be hearing more about a story that paints the two men currently with Ladbrokes at 5-1 to be the next Prime Minister, having presided over an organisation that, and do you know what, I'm going to ruffle my papers so that I get the quote exactly right on this one. It is the organisation that broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event. And I'll say it again, if I told you 3 years ago that the two front-runners with Ladbrokes to be our next Prime Minister would have achieved that role shortly after, 3 days after, having been found to be heading up an organisation that broke the electoral rules set out by Parliament to ensure fairness, confidence and legitimacy at an electoral event, you, quite understandably, would have laughed in my face. But that's where we are in Brexit Britain. Cheat and prosper. For now. Theo, what's going on?
Two options tonight. I just want to focus on, in those indicative votes, what Parliament would be prepared to agree to in order to pass Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Firstly, the customs union option put forward by Ken Clarke. Now, that has Labour support, but at the moment it doesn't have SNP support. And then another option coming up on the rails is the Norway option put forward by Nick Boles, the Conservative MP, which includes single market access, but of course drops the right of any future government to control freedom of movement. Therefore, it doesn't have the support of Labour at this time, but it does now have SNP support. They're going to get behind it. Now, from what I'm hearing, James, Cabinet tomorrow is going to be absolutely crucial, because Theresa May at that point is going to have to make a decision, if one of those options passes, about whether to adopt it as government policy. Jacob Rees-Mogg this morning gave Chris Grayling and Andrea Leadsom, the two biggest levers in the Cabinet, a pass, effectively saying that we'd now gone beyond the point of resignations. In other words, as chairman of the ERG, the European Research Group, if you don't want to resign, that's okay with us. Of course, there are members of the ERG who won't be happy about it, but that's a problem for Mr. Rees-Mogg. And of course, Michel Barnier has said, Chief Brexit negotiator for the European Union, has said that they would accept a customs union within 48 hours. That would allow us to leave on May the 22nd if we still wanted to, without a lengthy extension. Just one other point, very quickly to mention, is that the withdrawal agreement is legally binding. The political declaration to which a customs union would fit into isn't, but there is a link in the withdrawal agreement which means that any future Conservative leader cannot simply drop a customs union option, for instance, in the political declaration without completely unpicking the withdrawal agreement. Who wrote that clause?
I know where you're going with this. So just to be clearer, this would have been designed originally to prevent a British Prime Minister from subsequently going further with regard to integration than the original agreement allowed.
Yes.
But of course, if it is a safeguard against going further, it would also operate as a safeguard against diluting or retreating from what was originally agreed, which means it must have been negotiated by a former Secretary of State for leaving the European Union.
Step forward.
Which means it must have been negotiated by either David Davis or Dominic Raab, working on the principle that David Davis did absolutely nothing in his 2 years in the job on 130 grand a year or thereabouts. I'm going to say that Dominic Raab wrote this as a plan to stop the opposite of what it will now stop.
Exactly. So Dominic Raab would bind...
Do I get a lollipop?
Get a sticker and a badge, James. Dominic Raab basically brought forward this clause into the withdrawal agreement, which means that if Theresa May adopts a customs union as the political declaration and we leave on May the 22nd, that is what it will be at the end of the transition period, unless, of course, we want to try and rip up the withdrawal agreement, which has been proposed by Bob Stewart, the MP down in Beckenham, and a couple of Conservative others, that we just simply withdraw from an international treaty. Which this is the nuclear option, of course, but it would have bearings on how this country is viewed internationally.
Of course. I'm confused now. I've kind of kept across everything, as you know, with a degree of success and understanding.
He shot himself, Raab shot himself.
No, I understand that bit. I mean, there's been a big surprise there. That's dog bites man, isn't it? Raab makes a fool of himself in public, but it doesn't seem to matter. I think he's still 8-1 at the moment in the runners and the riders. But so how many votes are there going to be tonight? Do we know yet?
We don't know. The Speaker will select them at 3 o'clock.
Right. What's the thinking, for what it's worth?
Customs Union will be in there. That's Ken Clarke.
That's Ken Clarke's
That came closest last time.
Right.
By
and
8
that would
votes.
make us like... Well, there's no precedent for that, is there? Because Switzerland and Norway are both in Schengen.
Yes. So
right.
So Customs Union would be simply that would, and of course, do away with the backstop in Northern Ireland because we're in the customs union.
Because we'd have the same rules and regulations.
But Liam Fox couldn't travel around the world signing free trade deals. That's really important.
He isn't anyway.
No, he's negotiating them at the moment. But after we leave the European Union in December 2020, he couldn't put pen to paper.
Right.
So he'd have wasted those years.
And those rules of union would be set entirely by the European Commission.
Yes.
Of which we would no longer have any representation.
No say.
Okay, so that's number one.
That's number one. Then there's Norway option, which
free
is
movement back on the table.
Free movement back on the table, and of course, that's perfectly possible. But Labour are unlikely to vote for it because that would be seen as reneging on the result in June 2016, and the threat would then be to Jeremy Corbyn, and the Tories would campaign in a future general election that there you are blocking Brexit.
And they're doing that already.
Yeah,
James Cleverly did that at the weekend.
Not very successfully, of course.
No, that's true. Again, that's dog bites man. James Cleverly doing something not very successfully, but carry on.
So there's Norway. Then there's a second referendum on the deal itself. Now that came
Theresa May's deal versus.
Well, then that would have to be determined at a future date. Theresa May's deal versus Remain. Of course, there will be those who will say that's not a fair choice, and it's Remain versus Remain. So you should have Leave on the option. It becomes very complicated. But then that fell by 27 votes last time. How many Labour MPs voted against it?
30.
27.
27.
So you had members of the ERG. You had ERG press officers tweeting Team Seamus, which is, of course, a nod to Jeremy Corbyn's chief aide, Seamus Milne.
Yes.
So that's another option.
I'd rather the ERG members were tweeting Team Seamus than the AFD, but we are where we are. Carry on.
And then you've got a couple of amendments from John Barron, who's also a member of the ERG, saying that we should revert to no deal, which are very unlikely to pass.
Burke's not going to choose them because.
But even if he did, they wouldn't pass.
So that's just the bonkers wing still.
Yeah, and he's got one in there as well, a unicorn one, which is that will revert.
What would you do if you were John Burke?
He'll pick customs. This is a prediction. Customs Union, Norway, second referendum.
And that will own three, and whichever one comes first out of those three goes head to head with the withdrawal agreement tomorrow.
Not necessarily, because of course.
I mean, this is important. Spare a thought for the punters. I do this for Shamir's here now. Shamir, do you follow all this?
Come on, Shamir.
Say yes or no.
I'm supposed to say yes, but no.
No, and you work for the Vote Leave campaign. Theo's the only person left standing who's still got his head around all this stuff.
Because the Speaker said that if the government brings back a new vote, it has to be different, substantially different from the previous one.
Yes.
And at the moment...
Can't they separate the withdrawal agreement from the political declaration and claim that it was substantive?
That's what they did last time.
That was the previous one.
That's what they did last time.
Can't they separate it even further?
Well, there's one option which is they could prorogue Parliament, break up Parliament.
Yeah.
We've just been told this morning that Number 10 isn't prepared to involve the Queen. So that's not going to happen.
Good, well,
the only other option, James, is that they use something called the WAB bill. The withdrawal agreement bill. And the withdrawal agreement bill at second reading, which is the first point of when Parliament gets to vote on any piece of legislation, would become the meaningful vote. But that's trickery, and John Bercow doesn't like trickery on the other side, so he may well block that as well. And so actually, MPs may have missed their last chance to vote on Theresa May's deal as it is.
It may have already gone.
It may have already gone.
At least they told them it was meaningful this time, which was James Cleverly's complaint last time, but one. It was by the time we came to the third meaningful vote, he was complaining that no one had told him the second meaningful vote was meaningful.
Yeah.
Bless him. If you get to interview this lot anytime soon, I don't know why they're not returning my call. Will you ask them if they kept the receipt when they gave £1 billion to the DUP in return for a parliamentary majority?
Yeah. Is there anybody in particular you'd like to ask that question?
James Cleverly. Yeah, he seems to be charged with leading this claim that it's all Labour's fault that the ERG have scuppered Brexit at this point in proceedings. So make sure you get, because it works at Argos. It works at Argos. You go back to Argos. If you've kept the receipt, you can swap your headphones for some new ones. You could even get your money back. So if they kept the receipt, now the DUP, Nigel Dodds last week said that remaining might be the answer. Did you see that?
Yes. And they quite like the idea. The DUP could still be persuaded, James, on a permanent customs union. They could still be persuaded on the Ken Clark plan.
But that puts the border in the Irish Sea. Oh, no, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. It puts the whole of the United Kingdom...
customs union.
But that's Brino.
No, Norway.
Because of the freedom of movement issue. But they're not going to go for... Would the European Union go for that, for the customs union with that?
Yeah, he said within 48 hours. Barnier said within 48 hours.
All right, if I was a betting man...
Customs union is the closest.
I think you might be right.
8. 8 votes last time. Could they push it over the line? The other people to watch out for who are quite interesting are the Change group, TIG, because, of course, they oppose both Customs Union and Norway because they're gunning for a second referendum. And they want to, obviously change the course of what happened.
So anyone claiming that they know for sure what's going to happen next is lying.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But Theo was just laid out the clever money. Well done. We'll hear from Shamir Sani after this. So we return to the first story that we covered this morning, having had so much clarity. I'm overdosing on clarity now about what's going to happen next with I haven't got a clue. With regard to Brexit. The Vote Leave organisation coincidentally chose March the 29th to drop its appeal against a £61,000 fine for electoral offences committed during the Brexit referendum. I say coincidentally because, of course, if things had gone according to plan, we would have hauled Brexit over the line on March the 29th, and their fevered, frenzied and very shrill denials of any wrongdoing up to and including that point would have sort of disappeared almost without trace. What we do know, though, is that serious offences, such as those that Vote Leave were found to have committed, do, in the view of the Electoral Commission, undermine public confidence in our system. I don't think we'd have heard about these serious offences if it wasn't for my studio guest, Shamir Sani. Is that a fair comment, do you think? Not bigging up your role, you and Christopher Wiley between you brought these...
Yeah, I do, but I think that's more or less the case, yes.
So how did you feel on Friday? A curious mixture of vindication and anything else?
Yeah, it was incredibly vindicating, of course, and I think both me and Carol Cadwallader was sort of screaming down the phone, saying, "Oh, look, they've done it again. They've, put another nail in their coffin." But I think with my vindication, for me, is not really my priority.
No, I know.
Or what I want. For me, vindication really is a public inquiry, investigations, and people being held to account.
And that is, we're now at the end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end of that, you hope. I mean, do you have any confidence that things will be taken further? The Electoral as you know, the Electoral Commission have said that it's vital that they are properly investigated and sanctioned.
Yes, and I think the Electoral Commission is absolutely right in saying that. I think when it comes to the very sort of core values that we hold as Democrats, as progressives, or even as conservatives living in a country like Britain, democracy is at the core of all of our values. And I think when we have such a serious case of the perversion of that democracy by the people who are in line to become our leaders...
Yes, 5-1.
It's imperative that there are significant investigations. But we already know that when it comes to the police investigations, the Metropolitan Police had held on to the papers because of, quote, political sensitivities. Yes. And so I think the public needs to recognize that this is a lot bigger than Brexit and goes to the heart of...
Except nothing's bigger than Brexit, is it, at the moment? I mean, you'll forgive me for sounding a little downbeat, but it seems to me that the attitude to this law-breaking, if you were opposed to Brexit to start with, you see the gravity of it. If you were comfortable with Brexit to start with, you put your fingers in your ears and close your eyes, which is becoming a default position for people who were persuaded Brexit was a good idea 3 years ago. They essentially now live their lives with their eyes closed and their fingers in their ears.
But and the people to blame for that aren't the sort of individuals who are, in my opinion, yes, people do hold responsibility for knowledge and educating themselves. But I think when you have mainstream news outlets not covering topics that go to the heart of our democracy, when you have journalists and politicians like viciously saying this is all a lie, this is all hearsay. So I think it's important for the public to recognize that it's okay for us to say these people have two fingers in their ears, but everyone, whether you're Leave or Remainer, needs to actually hold the people in power to account so that they're not manipulated again, or that our democracy does not fall as under again.
Speaking of people in power, and indeed people being held to account, the initial defence that came out of Downing Street, if I'm correct, was that what you said hadn't occurred, and that the only conversation in which you were told it had occurred was pillow talk with your former boyfriend.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Downing Street. Now, For me, my vindication when these sort of things happen, like, for example, Vote Leave withdrawing their appeal, the first sort of thought that I have, I'm just reminded again that here's more proof that Downing Street weaponized my sexuality and weaponized my identity as a gay Muslim man to silence me. And also, for me to not see, particularly to not see public broadcasters like the BBC or even channels such as any mainstream news channel to not actually talk about this is evidence of, I guess, two things. One, there is a significant sense of fear among journalists on how to tackle this issue, but two, also a lot of people are complicit, because I know for a fact that many individuals in the most powerful parts of our political and media establishment are very close to the individuals who are implicated from the revelations and the evidence that I brought forward.
They would be friends and contacts.
Absolutely. And which is why it's been such a difficult situation. It's why there hasn't been that much coverage. You know, I didn't get one call from the BBC except from BBC Radio Scotland. And the Radio Scotland has always actually been on board.
Yes.
But otherwise, in terms of mainstream news.
I wonder, Shamir, I know we've had this conversation before, but it's like the Augean stables, isn't it? It's you either deny the existence of the Augean stables or you have to reroute entire rivers to clean them out. And when the head of Vote Leave turned up on the BBC, essentially offering up his rejection of these findings before the findings had been properly reported.
Vote Leave gave the Electoral Commission findings to the BBC in order for the BBC to report it before the Electoral Commission had even sent out the press statement.
With their excuses and denials,
absolutely,
all of which fell apart on Friday.
Well, yes, absolutely. The whole interview that Matthew Elliott did with BBC's Laura Koonsberg, who I'm a fan of.
Yes,
I don't have any negativity towards her, but for them to let Matthew Elliott slander the revelations that I had made without even a right of reply, a one-on-one interview on primetime television for him to say his case, and yet I was not even asked about it. Neither were any of the other people involved in this investigation.
Do you think it was a coincidence that March the 29th was the day upon which they put their hands up and rolled over?
Absolutely not. These people are complicit in crimes, and they will do anything, use any political tool to ensure that they are protected.
Breach by crimes, of course, we mean breaches of electoral law.
Yes.
The terminology is perfectly adequate. So what do you think will happen next? What do you think will happen next, and what do you hope will happen next?
Well,
We've only got a minute. There might be two different answers.
I think right now I don't know what to think in regards because of how chaotic the political situation is. But in terms of what I want an investigation into Michael Gove, into Gisela Stewart, into Boris Johnson, because it was their advisors who oversaw the entire campaign.
Yes,
and it was them who knew about Believe, Vote Leave, and everything that went on in the campaign because they were part of the campaign committee. So hopefully a public inquiry and full police investigations.
And what do you think will happen?
I think that this will be buried under the rug. I think that the institutions that are there at the moment, which are meant to hold these politicians to account, one, like the Electoral Commission, do not have enough power, or in the case of the Metropolitan Police, are too scared of political sensitivities. And two, I think Britain has always had a problem of institutional corruption. And Brexit is a sort of final kind of testament to that fact. And I think the British people need to wake up.
I hear you. And of course, again, not that I'm qualifying your phrases, but there is only you here, none of the other people we've mentioned here. The institutional corruption being a moral issue, at least as much as a legal one. I, for what it's worth, think that proximity is the problem, as you've absolutely highlighted. I think some people in our profession can't quite believe the scale of what has gone on and is going on, and is being either undertaken or not properly called out by men and women they've known for 30 or 40 years.
It's the biggest electoral scandal in British history.
Yeah, and we're reporting it almost single-handedly. Thanks to you, Shamir Sani. Thank you as ever. That's it from me for another day.